The morning sun dragged its slow burn across the prairie, casting gold across the brittle grass and revealing a figure too small to be anything but a child. Jed Turner leaned against the worn rail of his front porch, a chipped enamel mug warm in his hand, steam curling from the black coffee inside. He squinted, tilting the brim of his hat down as he focused on the movement, low to the ground, stumbling, fast but faltering. His first thought was coyote. His second was wolf. But this wasn't an animal. It was a girl. Barefoot. Dust-covered. Her dress ripped along one side. Legs scratched bloody. She was running like hell itself was chasing her. Jed didn't move. Not yet. He waited, watched the way her feet slapped the dirt, the panic in every motion. She tripped, caught herself on her hands, then scrambled back up. When she reached the fence line, she didn't hesitate. Just threw herself over, tumbling into the dust with a grunt. Jed set down his mug. The girl hit the porch stairs just as he stepped forward. Her chest heaved like her lungs were burning from the inside out, but she didn't stop to catch her breath. "Please," she gasped. "Please help. My uncle, he did things to my mama. She never talks about it, but I heard her crying last night. I had to run." Jed stared down at her, unmoving. His jaw clenched once. Then again. This land was used to silence. It swallowed secrets, but this one screamed too loud to ignore. "Come inside," he said. She flinched at the creak of the door, then slipped past him when he stepped aside. She was small. 9, maybe 10. Thin in a way that spoke more of skipped meals than growing pains. Her eyes were wide, dark, rimmed red. Inside the cabin was dim, the air cooler. She hovered near the fireplace, rubbing her arms like she'd never been warm. Jed poured her water from the tin kettle and handed her the cup. She didn't say thank you. Just drank like she'd never see water again. "What's your name?" She looked at him, mouth twitching. "Annie." He nodded. "You hurt?" She shook her head. "Who's your mama?" "Rose." "And your uncle?" Her face shuddered instantly. She looked down at the cup. Jed waited. When nothing came, he stood. The chair creaked under him. His bones were tired in a way that sleep didn't cure anymore. "You're safe here," he said. "No one's gonna touch you." The girl's lips trembled, and for a moment Jed thought she might cry. Instead, she gritted her teeth and said nothing. He busied himself at the stove, cracking eggs into a pan, the old cast iron spitting and hissing in reply. The smell filled the cabin. He saw her eyes flick toward the food. When the plate landed in front of her, she hesitated, then ate. Fast. One hand curled protectively around the plate like someone might take it away. Jed didn't ask more questions. Not yet. Outside, the prairie whispered, wind brushing through the grass like a warning. The place was still, but Jed's gut told him the stillness wouldn't last. He sat across from her and studied her features. Dust streaked her cheeks. A bruise bloomed along one collarbone. Faded. But there. "You said he did things to your mama?" Jed said finally, voice low. And he froze. Swallowed. "She never talks," she whispered. "Even when she cries, she tries to hide it. But last night, it was bad. I heard him yelling. Things breaking. Then it got quiet. I waited for morning. Then I ran." Jed nodded once. "Is he your real uncle?" She shook her head. "Then what is he?" "I don't know," she said. "Mama won't say. He calls her his little Rose. Says she owes him. That she ain't going nowhere." The air turned colder. Jed's knuckles went white around his cup. He'd heard this kind of story before. Not the same faces. Not the same names. But the same rot. Same stink of men who thought hurting others made them powerful. Annie looked up at him. "You gonna send me back?" "No," Jed said. "I ain't." She exhaled hard like she'd been holding it in for days. Jed stood and pulled the curtain back a sliver. Nothing but grass and the shimmer of heat rising in the distance. But he knew better than to trust quiet. He turned to her. "You run a long way?" "All night." "You got any folks?" She shook her head. "Mama. That's it." Jed stepped into the back room. When he returned, he held an old wool blanket. She took it, wrapped herself tight. He stood with his hands on his hips. The silence stretched. "I ain't good at talking," he said. "That's okay," Annie replied. "Most men who talk a lot don't mean what they say." Jed's mouth quirked barely. It wasn't a smile. Not yet. But it wasn't nothing. Later she fell asleep curled on the couch. Jed sat nearby, cleaning his rifle. Each click of the bolt, each careful slide of the cloth down the barrel, steadied his breathing. He didn't know what kind of man Mason was yet. But he knew the type. The kind who thought silence meant consent. That fear was the same as obedience. Jed had seen men like that back in the war. And he'd buried more than one of them. He sat for hours watching the doorway, the windows. Waiting. When the sun was high, Annie woke. Her voice was small. "I think he'll come." Jed nodded. "I think he will too." He opened the cabinet, pulled out another rifle. Smaller. A .22. He handed it to her. Her eyes widened. "For me?" "Just to learn. I've never shot one." "You will." They stepped outside, the sun sharp and the wind dry. He set up a row of empty cans along a fence post. Showed her how to aim. How to breathe. How not to flinch. She missed every time. But each shot was steadier. When she finally hit a can, she gasped. Jed grunted. "Told you." "I feel stronger," she whispered. "Good." They spent an hour like that. Shooting. Laughing just a little. It wasn't much, but it was more than she'd had in a long time. Then, in the late afternoon, just as the wind changed, the sound came. Hoofbeats. Distant. Steady. Annie turned to him, eyes wide. Her hands trembled. Jed didn't speak. He lifted the rifle from beside the door. Checked the chamber. Stepped off the porch and faced the horizon. A man approached on a dun-colored horse. His hat low, a smirk visible even from a distance. He rode like he owned the ground. Jed kept the rifle low. But ready. The man pulled up 10 feet out. Spat in the dirt. "Afternoon." Jed didn't reply. "I'm looking for a little girl. Dark hair. Big eyes. Ran off this morning. Seen her?" Jed didn't blink. "She's inside." The man's eyes narrowed. "She belongs with her family." "She say that." "She don't get to say." Jed stepped forward. "She does now." The man laughed. "Look, old man." Jed lifted the rifle 1 inch. That ended the laughter. "You listen close," Jed said, voice flat as flint. "She stays here. Her mama stays safe. You show up again or lay a hand on either of them." He stepped forward 1 more pace. "You die." Silence. The wind caught the edge of the man's coat. "I'll be back," the man said. Jed nodded. "Bring a shovel." The man turned his horse and rode off. Jed watched until he vanished. Inside, Annie stood by the window, eyes shining. "You meant it," she whispered. Jed turned, face unreadable. "I always mean it." That night, Jed sat by the door, rifle in hand. Annie slept behind him, wrapped in the wool blanket. He listened to the wind, the faint howl of a coyote in the distance, and the quiet creak of old boards beneath his boots. For the first time in years, Jed Turner felt something settle deep in his chest. Not peace. Not yet. But purpose. And that was enough, for now. The next morning broke sharp and bright, the prairie winds scraping across the land like the edge of a blade. Jed had risen early not because of habit, though habit helped, but because he hadn't truly slept. He never did when something heavy hung in the air. And this was heavier than most storms. Annie was already awake, sitting on the porch with her knees pulled up to her chest and a thick mug of milk in both hands. Her eyes followed the horizon like it might bite her again. She said nothing as Jed stepped outside and stood next to her. "They always find you," she said softly. Jed didn't reply. He didn't need to. She was right. Men like Mason didn't forget insults. They didn't lose gracefully. They just came back meaner. They shared a quiet breakfast, beans, bacon, hard biscuits soaked in coffee. Jed kept glancing toward the road. He wasn't waiting. He was preparing. He didn't know when Mason would come again, but he knew it wouldn't be far off. Cowards usually came in daylight when they could talk loud and puff out their chests. The dangerous ones waited for night. Mid-morning the hooves came. This time Jed heard them long before Annie did. The girl was gathering eggs behind the house when Jed's hand slid to his rifle, his eyes already narrowing. He stepped off the porch as the rider drew closer, alone for now. Slick hair, a face like rotting charm, and a black coat he wore like a snake's skin. "Mason." He pulled up at the gate, smirking like the devil had sent him with a sales pitch. "Well now, ain't this a pretty slice of dirt you've got here?" Jed didn't respond. He simply stood still, the rifle pointed down but far from forgotten. Mason leaned forward in the saddle, grin widening. "You've got something of mine." Jed cocked his head slightly. "She ain't property. She's blood." "She says otherwise." Mason laughed, and even the horse seemed to flinch. "You don't know what you're tangling with, Turner. You think a girl runs from home, and you're some kind of hero for scooping her up." Jed finally raised his rifle, not aiming it, just making sure it was seen. "You come back with law," he said, "or don't come back at all." Mason's expression hardened, but the smirk lingered like a stain. "You're gonna regret this." "Already do," Jed said. Wish I'd shot you yesterday. The silence thickened. The wind hissed. Then Mason yanked the reins and turned the horse around. He didn't ride off fast. No, he wanted it to feel like a promise. Jed watched until the dust settled. Annie peeked out from behind the coupe. That was him. Jed nodded. Yep. She stepped closer, her face pale. You think he'll come back with more? Jed looked at her, the squint in his eyes sharpening. I think he's the kind of man who hides behind worse men. The day passed slow. Jed worked the fences, Annie trailing behind him, asking more questions than she had before. She wanted to know how to shoot better, how to tell if someone was lying, how to fix a broken fence. Jed answered what he could. She watched every move like it might one day save her life. That night, when the lamps were low and the fire cracked, she asked the question that had been circling them both. Why are you helping me? Jed stared into the flames a long moment before answering. Had a daughter once. Annie didn't say anything. She didn't need to. She was about your age, Jed said. Smart. Brave. Too brave. What happened? Raiders hit our wagon on the way west. Wife didn't make it. Daughter neither. He didn't elaborate. Didn't have to. That why you live out here? Alone. Jed nodded. The room went quiet except for the pop of burning logs. Then Annie whispered, I'm sorry. Jed turned slightly. Don't be. You ran from the same kind of monster that took them. In another town, in another building altogether, Rose stood at the edge of a cracked mirror. Her fingers grazed the bruises across her jaw, blooming yellow and purple like rotting flowers. Her mouth trembled, but she didn't cry. Mason hadn't come back last night. That meant he was brewing something. He never stayed away without reason. When he returned, it would be with fists or worse. The shack they lived in had once been part of a mining camp. Now abandoned, sun-bleached boards sagging under a roof that leaked in 3 corners. There were no neighbors. No law. Just dust and threats. She sat down on the bed and winced. Her ribs ached. Her right eye wouldn't open fully. But she was alive. She'd gotten Annie away. That was something. She reached under the mattress, fingers brushing over the small knife she kept hidden there. It wouldn't save her, but it might be enough to end things on her own terms if it came to that. Rose had spent years learning silence. It was the only shield Mason didn't try to rip away. But silence had never protected her daughter. And now, for the first time, she hated her own quiet. She looked at the broken glass again and whispered, Don't come back. Back at the ranch, Jed stood in the saloon in town, leaning against the bar, watching the mirror. The place was half empty, the way it always was when trouble hovered in the wind. The barkeep, Nate, a man with gray stubble and a glass eye, slid a shot across the counter. You don't usually come in unless you're buying salt or grief. Jed didn't answer immediately. I need a name confirmed. Nate's brow lifted. Mason, Jed said. Used to run with a crew. Before the war. You know him? Nate's face twisted slightly. Yeah. Mason Blake. He's bad blood. Daddy was a rustler, brothers were worse. Rode with the Harlan gang down south until they got hunted out. Now he floats. Finds quiet places. Breaks them. Jed drank the whiskey in one swallow. You're in deep if you're dealing with him, Nate said. Town don't want no part of that. Sheriff might act like he wears a badge, but he won't touch men like Mason. I ain't asking him to. You planning to put him in the ground? If he earns it. Nate glanced out the window like he half expected gunfire already. Just be careful. Devils wear smiles too. Jed rode back in silence, the wind howling like a beast on his trail. When he returned, Annie was waiting with 2 rifles, both polished, both loaded. She didn't smile, but she looked steadier. That night, as they sat in the cabin, she looked up at him and asked, What if Mama doesn't want to leave him? Jed didn't lie. Then we get her out anyway. But what if she's scared? Then we make her safe enough not to be. She nodded. Okay. Later, after she'd gone to bed, Jed stood on the porch, watching the stars roll slow across the sky. His fingers flexed around the grip of his rifle. His bones ached in the way that warned of coming violence. He didn't want to fight. But some fights come hunting you. Behind him, Annie stirred in her sleep and muttered something he couldn't hear. Jed turned back to the night, eyes scanning the distance. Somewhere out there, Mason was planning his return. Jed could feel it in his blood, in the way the land tensed under his boots. He'd already made his promise. If Mason ever touched that girl's mother again, he'd die. And out here, in the wild where law was a suggestion, promises were just as deadly as bullets. The air turned colder by the hour, even though the sun clung stubbornly to the sky. Jed stood beneath the overhang of the porch, chewing on the last edge of a cigar he hadn't lit. His eyes scanned the western hills, not really looking for anything, but expecting everything. He could feel the shift in the wind, the stillness of animals gone silent, like even the jackrabbits were holding their breath. Something was coming. And it wouldn't knock before it broke the door down. Inside, Annie braided lengths of rope with surprisingly focused hands. She had a method to it, one Jed recognized from watching women on wagon trains keep busy while waiting out fear. Her lips were tight, her brow furrowed. She didn't talk much today. But she didn't hide either. That was progress. Around midday, Jed saddled up. He left a note on the table, 3 short lines in blocky handwriting, and told Annie not to leave the cabin. Not even to look out the window if she didn't have to. She didn't argue. She simply said, "Be careful," and handed him one of the pistols from the shelf like it belonged in his hand. Jed rode with urgency but no panic. The path to the old mining town was etched in his memory. He'd passed through it years ago when it still breathed. Now it was nothing but collapsed roofs and wind-scoured windows, a place for ghosts and men with nowhere left to go. That's where Mason had dragged Rose. Jed knew it before he even saw the crooked shack sitting at the edge of the broken road. He dismounted behind a ridge and approached on foot, boots soft in the dust. He didn't draw his weapon yet. No point in starting the fire before he saw where the oil was spilled. The door was cracked, barely holding on to one hinge. He stepped to the side, back pressed against the wall, and knocked once. Silence. Then movement inside. Shuffling. A shadow across the floor. "Rose?" he called. "Nothing." "Name's Jed Turner. I'm the one looking after your girl." That was when the door opened. She looked like someone who had been set on fire and left to cool in the dirt. Her face was bruised down one cheek, her eye swollen, and her lip cut, still red. But her gaze was steady. And when she saw the man standing before her, something inside her cracked. "She's alive?" she whispered. "Safe," Jed said. "I give you my word." Her knees buckled. Jed caught her before she hit the floor, guiding her gently into a chair inside the shack. The place smelled like rot and sweat and years of fear packed into 4 crooked walls. He poured water from a tin into her hands and waited while she drank. "You can't be here," she rasped. "Mason gone?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Left this morning. Said he had to deal with some cowboy. I figured that meant you." Jed's jaw tightened. "We leave now," he said. "Come on. Can't waste the daylight." Rose's eyes darted to a corner of the room. Jed followed her gaze and saw a bundle of belongings, clothes, a small doll, an old photograph. She'd already packed. He nodded, approval silent but understood. "You sure he won't be back soon?" "No," she said. "But if he is, I'm not hiding again." Jed stepped outside, scanned the horizon, and motioned her to follow. He helped her onto the horse, then mounted behind her. They rode hard, cutting east through the gulch to avoid the main road. Halfway through the ride, Rose spoke over the wind. She tried to run before. "I stopped her." Jed said nothing. "I thought I was keeping her safe. Thought if she stayed he wouldn't get angry. But he always did. Always found a reason." "You ain't the first woman to believe that lie," Jed replied. "But I might be the last one dumb enough to believe it this long." They made it back to the ranch just as the sky began to bruise with sunset. Annie burst through the door the moment she heard the horse, her face pale with fear, then flushed with relief. When she saw her mother, she froze. Rose dismounted slowly. Every movement hurt, but she walked straight to her daughter and dropped to her knees. Annie didn't run. She just stood, eyes locked on her mother's face. "I'm sorry," Rose whispered. "I should have left sooner. I should have taken you." Annie knelt, wrapping her arms around her mother's neck. Jed turned away. Gave them the privacy they needed, but he didn't go far. His rifle stayed nearby. Later, when the sun disappeared and night fell sharp and fast, they ate stew together by the fire. Rose ate slowly, as if savoring something that might be taken away again. Annie stuck close to her, but there was a weight lifted from her shoulders Jed hadn't seen before. After dinner, Rose asked Jed if he'd always lived alone. He stirred the coals with a poker. "Not always." "You lost someone." He nodded. "So you know." "More than I wish I did." Rose reached for a piece of bread, but her fingers trembled. Annie noticed. Without saying anything, she slid the cup of water closer. It was a small gesture, but Jed saw the depth of it. That night, Jed didn't sleep. He sat out front, rifle resting across his lap, the lantern beside him barely flickering. He didn't know what Mason would do when he realized Rose was gone. But he knew how men like him thought. He'd feel ownership, betrayal, rage. He'd tell himself the world owed him. Men like that didn't let go. They came clawing back. Sometime after midnight he heard it. A whisper in the distance. Then a crack like a footstep on dry timber. He stood slowly, scanning the dark. A figure emerged from the tree line, only a shadow against deeper black. Jed didn't move. Didn't raise his rifle yet. He waited until the voice spoke. "You got her, didn't you, Mason?" Jed didn't answer. "Thought you were smart. Thought you were just another lonely fool with a rifle and no purpose." Still Jed said nothing. "I'm gonna take her back. And when I'm done I'll leave the girl for the buzzards." "You think I'm bluffing?" Jed raised the rifle, slow and deliberate. "I'm done thinking." Pause. Then retreating footsteps. No shots. No charge. Mason vanished into the dark like a ghost too cowardly to haunt. But Jed knew better. He would be back. With others. Guns. Fire. Maybe worse. The next morning, Jed packed a saddlebag full of ammunition and supplies. He gave Annie the small .22 again and had her practice reloading. Rose stood near the barn, watching the horizon. "I never thought I'd see him afraid." Jed didn't turn. "He ain't afraid. He's just planning." "You think we'll survive him?" "We'll do better than survive." Annie fired a shot. Hit the can clean off the post. Jed gave a rare half-smile. "Told you she'd learn." Rose looked at her daughter and then back at Jed. "What happens when he brings others?" Jed loaded another rifle, his movements calm. "Then we remind them this ain't their land." The prairie stretched quiet and wide around them, but the silence wasn't peace. It was the breath before a scream. Rose rested her hand on the fence rail, fingers tracing the grain like it could answer the fear that still lived in her bones. "I'll fight," she said. Jed nodded. "I know." The day dragged by long and dry. They set traps, reinforced the cabin, moved supplies into the cellar. Jed taught Annie how to break open a reload box with her boot. Taught Rose how to handle the shotgun without bruising her shoulder too much. The work kept their minds focused, their hands steady. But under it all, the tension never left. As dusk bled into darkness again, Jed lit a single lamp and placed it in the window. A message. Let him come. Let him try. They were done running. And if the night brought blood, so be it. Some justice wasn't written in law books. Some justice was earned one bullet at a time. The wind died before dusk, a strange stillness settling over the land like the world had stopped breathing. Jed knew that kind of silence. It wasn't peace. It was the sound of a hammer raised in the air just before it fell. He stood near the barn, shotgun slung low at his hip, scanning the tree line that bordered the far edge of the property. The sky glowed orange behind the hills, but his eyes weren't on the sunset. They were locked on the shadowed edge of the world where something waited, watching. Inside the cabin, Rose moved quietly, checking the rifle Jed had taught her to use, her fingers trembling only slightly now. She'd changed. In 2 days, the hollow quiet of a broken woman had shifted into something sharper, grit, resolve. Fear was still there, yes, but it didn't define her anymore. She was angry. And anger, when controlled, could be powerful. Annie sat near the hearth, cleaning bullets with a cloth as if it were a sacred task. She didn't speak much, but her shoulders were squared, her chin lifted. Whatever childhood she had left was burning away in the firelight. All that remained was a girl who'd seen too much and still refused to be small. Jed stepped back into the cabin and spoke without raising his voice. "They'll come tonight." Rose nodded. "How many?" "No telling. Mason won't ride in alone. He's not the type to die quietly." Annie looked up. "Will they hurt us?" Jed crouched beside her and met her eyes. "They'll try. But they'll have to get past me first. And I don't plan on letting that happen." She gave a short nod. Not brave, not scared. Just ready. They moved through the house, each of them falling into the rhythm of preparation without wasted motion. Jed reinforced the doors with extra boards. He placed a scattergun near the back window and loaded the pistols, placing them within reach of both Rose and Annie. The root cellar hatch was left open. If things turned bad, if it all fell apart, they could hide. But none of them spoke about running. As night settled full over the land, the moon barely made it through the heavy clouds. They didn't light lamps. Darkness was an ally when used right. The first noise came just past midnight, a rustle in the grass, the sound of hooves in the soft dirt. Then silence. Jed stood near the front door, eyes fixed on the thin slit he'd left between the boards. The tension in his spine grew with every breath. Then the voice came, low and casual, slurred with mockery. "Evenin', Turner. Brought company." Jed said nothing. "I figure this is your last chance. Send Rose out. Send the girl too." No one needs to get hurt. Pause. The sound of boots crunching. Jed answered, his voice steady. You already hurt them. Now you'll bleed for it. A different voice snorted. Big talk from one man. Jed fired the first shot through the slit in the boards. The sound shattered the silence like glass, followed by a grunt and the thump of a body hitting the dirt. No hesitation. No warning. The men outside erupted, shouting, scattering, fumbling for cover. Another shot cracked from the side window, this one from Rose. Jed didn't look back. He didn't need to. The woman had fire in her now. A bullet punched through the doorframe. Jed ducked, rolled to the other window and fired again. He didn't aim to kill, just to warn, to shake their confidence. Cowards turned tail when they met resistance. It was the truly broken ones that kept coming. From the shadows, someone yelled, "Get around the back." Jed moved fast, grabbing the lantern and hurling it out the front door where it shattered and burst into flame in the dry grass. It lit up the yard like a lightning strike. Shapes ducked and scattered, outlines of armed men too clumsy to stay invisible now. Annie called out from behind the hearth. "Two going to the barn." Rose grabbed the shotgun and turned toward the rear door. Jed moved with her, covering her as she opened it slightly and peeked out. "They're circling." "I see them," Jed muttered. "Time to remind them this ain't theirs to take." He slipped out through the side, low and quiet, rifle in hand. The earth felt solid under his boots, like it knew what was coming. Jed moved behind the hay bales near the barn, crouching in silence. One man approached, shotgun raised, cocky and loud. "You done playing cowboy?" the man barked. Jed didn't answer. He waited until the man stepped within 5 feet, then rose like a ghost and cracked the butt of his rifle across the man's jaw. Bones snapped. The man dropped. The second one fired blindly. The shot missed, tore into the barn wall. Jed turned, fired once, and the second man went down, screaming and grabbing his leg. Not dead, but out of the fight. Back at the house, Rose and Annie held the line. A bullet shattered a front window, glass exploding inward. Annie ducked but didn't cry out. Rose returned fire, hitting the edge of a porch beam where someone had taken cover. The men outside didn't expect this kind of resistance. They thought it would be easy, swoop in, scare the girl, grab the woman, kill the man. But now one was dead, one wounded, and the others were starting to hesitate. Then Mason's voice rose over the confusion, colder now, sharper. "I'll burn this place down with all of you in it." Jed returned just in time to hear that. He stepped into the house, blood on his knuckles, sweat streaked across his neck. "Then come light the match," he shouted. No answer. Jed looked at Rose. "We end this now. He's not leaving here." "I don't want him to," she said. "Not anymore." She handed Annie the pistol, the girl's fingers trembling only slightly as she took it. "Stay near the cellar," Jed said. "I can help." "You already are." Outside they heard Mason walking now. His boots moved slow, deliberate. He didn't call out. He was done talking. Then the porch creaked. Jed stood near the door, shotgun raised. Rose flanked the window, waiting. The door burst open. Mason stood there, pistol in one hand, knife in the other, wildness burning in his eyes. "You think you can take her from me?" he screamed. Rose stepped into view, rifle raised. Her hands were firm. "She was never yours." Mason turned to her, sneer curling. "You owe me, Rose. I took care of you." Jed stepped forward, aiming square at his chest. "She doesn't owe you a damn thing." Mason spun, fast but not fast enough. Jed fired. The shot hit him clean in the shoulder, spinning him backward into the porch post. He screamed, dropped the pistol but still gripped the knife. He lunged at Rose. She didn't flinch. She pulled the trigger. The blast hit him in the gut, knocking him off his feet and onto the dirt. He gurgled something, tried to rise, then collapsed. The knife clattered away. Silence fell. Smoke drifted in the windless air. The fire in the yard had burned out, leaving black ash in the grass. No more movement from the tree line. The others had fled. Cowards, every one of them. They didn't fight for Mason. They followed his fear. And now he was gone. Rose lowered the gun slowly. Her chest rose and fell, but she didn't cry. She didn't shake. She just stood over the man who'd caged her for years and watched the last of his life vanish into the dirt. Annie stepped out of the doorway, wide-eyed. "It's over?" Jed looked at her, then at Rose, then down at Mason's still body. "No," he said. "But it's a start." They buried the dead behind the barn. No words spoken. No markers left. The land would reclaim them in time as it did all things. That night, the three of them sat in silence by the fire, the windows unboarded, the doors unlocked. For the first time in days, There was no sound but the wind returning, soft again, weaving through the trees and past the cabin like it had been waiting for permission. Annie leaned against her mother's side. Rose stared into the flames, her face unreadable but unafraid. Jed stood near the open door, rifle leaning against the frame, watching the stars stretch wide above the black horizon. He knew there were more storms in the world. There always would be. But not tonight. Tonight they'd earned the quiet. Morning on the prairie came slow, the sky bleeding from deep violet to burnt orange, soft and sure. The earth felt different now. Calmer maybe. Or maybe it was just that the cabin hadn't shaken with fear through the night. The ground no longer hummed with danger. The silence was cleaner. Still, Jed Turner rose before the sun, muscles sore, senses alert. Habit mostly. But part of him didn't trust peace, not after everything. He stepped outside, boots crunching against the dry grass, and stared across the endless stretch of land. Nothing moved but the wind brushing against the tall stalks. He let the stillness settle in his chest for a moment before returning inside. Annie was up too, sitting at the table with a cup of coffee she couldn't possibly like but drank anyway. Her legs swung back and forth under the chair, restless. She didn't look like the girl who'd run across the prairie days ago, barefoot and terrified. She looked older, sharper. Her hair was neatly braided back, and there was something fierce in her eyes now, like she'd finally met the world and she wasn't scared of it anymore. "You sleep at all?" Jed asked, pouring himself a cup. She nodded once. "A little. I kept dreaming about the fire. But not the bad part. Just the light. It looked like it was swallowing everything." He didn't comment. Dreams weren't always about fear. Sometimes they were warnings. Sometimes they were memories that hadn't happened yet. Rose came out of the back room a few minutes later, pulling her shawl around her shoulders. Her gait was stiff, but there was strength in it now, not just endurance. The bruises on her face were beginning to fade, but the fire in her eyes had taken permanent root. "We'll need more wood before nightfall," she said, tying her hair back. "I'll take care of it," Jed replied, already reaching for his gloves. "We'll help," Annie offered. Jed glanced at her, then at Rose. Both looked determined. So he nodded. The girl wanted to carry weight. Let her. They spent the morning chopping and stacking, working in rhythm, sweat glistening on foreheads and arms. No one complained. Even Annie swung the axe with all the concentration she could muster. She wasn't strong yet, not really, but she didn't back down. Jed watched her swing, miss, adjust her grip, and try again. Persistence, not perfection. That's what mattered. By noon, the pile was high, and the air had grown thick with heat. Rose leaned on the axe handle and wiped her brow, her voice quiet but thoughtful. "I've been thinking," she said. "I want to go into town. Properly. Just for a day." Jed's jaw tightened slightly. Not because he didn't want her to go, he did. But he also knew what towns were like. Small ones. Talk was currency and people spent it recklessly. "You sure?" She nodded. "I'm tired of hiding. I need to walk through somewhere with my chin up. Even if people whisper." Annie looked from her mother to Jed. "Can I go too?" Rose placed a hand on her daughter's shoulder. "Only if you're ready." "I am." They cleaned up and packed light. Jed hitched the wagon, a rickety thing he hadn't used in months, and they set off just as the shadows grew long. The town of Cold Creek wasn't much. 3 dusty streets, 1 church, 1 jail, 2 saloons, and a general store that sold everything from rifle oil to licorice twists. They arrived just after sundown. The town wasn't asleep yet, but it blinked at them like they didn't quite belong. Rose stepped down from the wagon first, her boots crunching into the gravel with purpose. She adjusted her shawl and held her head high. Annie followed, glancing around with wide, searching eyes. Jed stayed close, hand near his holster, not because he expected trouble, but because men didn't always wait for a reason to cause it. Inside the general store, the old shopkeeper did a double take when Rose walked in. Her face was mostly healed, but her eyes carried the kind of history that made people stop mid-sentence. "Well now," the man muttered, "ain't seen you round in years." Rose nodded, not smiling. "No reason to come back. Until now." She moved through the store with calm confidence, choosing fabric, dried beans, a tin of sweets for Annie. She didn't ask for help. Didn't apologize. Jed watched her from the corner, arms crossed, heart steady. Pride wasn't something he'd let himself feel in years, but now it stirred. When they left the store, the air outside had cooled, and the saloon doors creaked open across the street. A man stepped out, drunk or just loud by nature. He squinted across the road and stumbled forward. "Well, I'll be damned. If it ain't Rose Blake." The name hit the air like a whip. Jed's eyes sharpened. Annie shrank closer to her mother. Rose turned slowly. The man staggered toward them, waving a hand lazily. Didn't think I'd see you back in town. Thought your protector might have buried you out on that ranch. Jed stepped forward, slow and deliberate. The man's eyes locked on him, and something shifted behind the drunken grin. You got a problem? Jed asked. The man raised his hands. Just talking. She's got history, that's all. So do bullets, Jed replied. Best not to meet either without good reason. A long silence passed between them. Then the man snorted and turned away, muttering as he disappeared into the shadows. Rose let out a long breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Jed didn't look at her. That what you came for? Yeah, she said, voice soft but firm. To hear someone say it and not run. To stand up and not shrink. They left the town as the sky darkened. The stars were brighter that night, scattered across the heavens like something had shaken them loose from a jar. Back at the ranch, the house welcomed them with the scent of cedar and leftover stew. Annie fed the fire. Rose boiled water for tea. Jed sat outside on the porch, watching the horizon. The girl joined him not long after, climbing onto the step beside him. You really would have killed him, wouldn't you? She asked. Jed didn't pretend not to know who she meant. Yes. Annie was quiet a moment, then looked at him with that same sharp, clear gaze. He was going to kill her too. I think he would have. If you hadn't come. Jed nodded. That's why I came. She stared at the stars. Do people like him ever really go away? Only if good people make sure they do. She took that in, nodding slowly. Am I good? She asked. Jed turned to look at her. You're brave. That's a start. I want to be strong. You are. Stronger than most grown men I've met. She smiled, small and crooked, but it was real. Inside, Rose stood by the window, watching the two of them with a look Jed hadn't seen on her face before. Hope. Not the desperate kind. The earned kind. Later, after the lamps were blown out and the house settled into stillness, Jed sat by the dying fire, Rose across from him. I've been thinking, she said. Dangerous habit. She smiled. I want to stay. For a while. Help out around here. Build something of my own again. Jed met her eyes, and for a moment neither spoke. You're welcome, he said. Always were. A long silence passed between them, but it was warm now. Not empty. Rose leaned forward, her voice low. You think it's over? Jed stirred the embers with the fire iron. Nothing's ever over. But we've got ground to stand on. That's more than most. She nodded, then whispered, Thank you. For showing up. He looked at her, eyes tired but steady. I didn't show up. I just stayed when it mattered. Outside, the wind moved gently through the grass, carrying the scent of earth and pine. The land wasn't healed, but it had stopped bleeding. Somewhere in the distance, coyotes yipped beneath the stars. But they were far away. And for once, the cabin didn't flinch. The girl who ran across the prairie had found something more than safety. She'd found a home. And the man who thought he had nothing left had become something again. A shield, a father, a quiet fury against the world's cruelties. If the past ever came riding back, it would find this place guarded. Not by vengeance, but by love sharpened into something unbreakable.